And would you welcome Dr. Hugh Ross as he comes and ministers to us?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you. And we got some of our people at the book table there. And, we had reasons to believe are here for you. We're not just here to talk to the science geeks, although several of you are science geeks. So thank you for coming. But regardless of your background or interest in science, we know from experience that the book of nature, the record of nature, is a powerful tool to bring people into a relationship with the creator of the universe. And one of the things I get to do as the president of Reasons to Believe is to spend significant time going through the scientific literature. And so what I share with you this morning, the book of Job and Psalms tells us the more we learn from nature, the more evidence we see for the handiwork of God. And so I maintain a Twitter page where I give you links to the scientific research papers that give us more evidence for the supernatural handiwork of God. And it's one of the privileges of living in the 21st century. At no other time in human history have we been learning so much from the book of nature. And it's such that I'm able to post between 4 and 5 tweets a day, giving you links to research papers that make a stronger case for the Christian faith. Now, that's, of course, only 140 characters. I encourage you to also to go to our Facebook page where we have articles that kind of flesh out for you the significance of some of these discoveries. But that's the other wonderful thing about living in the 21st century. I not only give you a tweet about these papers, I give you a direct link so you can see it for yourself. And if you're not a science geek, you might know science geeks, and you'll be able to tell them, hey, you can actually read the original paper and see the amazing things that are being discovered today that testify of Jesus Christ as Creator, Lord, and Savior. And as I mentioned this morning, we have a free gift for you at the back. It's this DVD where I get to explain how astronomy and physics brought me to faith in Jesus Christ 8 years before I really got to know a Christian, and also features me answering questions from skeptics. That's a gift that you can give away to somebody to get them started on developing a relationship with Jesus Christ. Well, I got a question for all of you. How many of you ever heard of the term Anthropic Principle? Okay, a few of you have heard that term. If you run into someone who's interested in science, they will have heard of that term. However, what's happened in the past few years has become a very confusing term. So I'm going to define it as it was defined 30 years ago, and then I'm going to explain to you how it got confused, because the Anthropic Principle powerfully testifies of the God of the Bible. And what's happened is this one anthropic principle has evolved into many different anthropic principles. But this is how it was originally defined: that the existence of us human beings depends on numerous features of the universe whose numerical values must fall within extremely narrow ranges. This is the heart of the fine-tuning argument for God. And for the last 2,000 years, the design argument or the fine-tuning argument has proven to be the most persuasive for persuading people that there's a God that created the universe, a God who cares and loves for us. What's happened in the 21st century is it's now been technically defined. This is the Anthropic Principle. The fact that we see in the universe literally hundreds of features that must fall within extremely narrow ranges to make possible the existence of us human beings. Now, in addition to this cosmic anthropic principle, there is a galactic anthropic principle. So, for example, 140 different features of our universe must be fine-tuned in order to make possible the existence of us human beings. But in addition to these 140 features, there's over 850 features of our Milky Way galaxy and of our solar system that must be fine-tuned to make possible the existence of us human beings within the universe. And the list literally grows every year. In fact, you can go to a spot on our website, reasons.org/fine-tuning. And if you go there, you'll see all these characteristics featured, the fine-tuning defined, and there'll be citations to the scientific literature so you can see for yourself what the scientists have developed. Now, my colleagues in astronomy and physics have recognized the theological significance of these anthropic principles, that this extreme fine-tuning testifies of an intelligent, supernatural being that designed the universe so that we human beings can exist. And in reaction to that, what's happened in the past several years is they've watered down this anthropic principle. And what you'll see in the scientific literature now is not really the anthropic principle, although they call it that. It really has become the prebiotic principle. So instead of looking at what has to be fine-tuned in order to make possible existence of human beings, they simply, well, what needs to be fine-tuned to make possible the building blocks of proteins, DNA, and RNA? So what is necessary to make possible prebiotic chemistry? Now, as an astronomer, I can tell you the fine-tuning is orders of magnitude less impressive if all you're looking for is the building blocks of these life molecules than it is to get a human being. We humans are much more complex than amino acids and sugars and nucleobases. However, what I find ironic about this watering down of the anthropic principle is that even this prebiotic principle testifies of a supernatural being. Why? Because we astronomers have been looking for these building block molecules. As we look everywhere within the universe, we're not able to find the ribose sugars. You say, why are those important? Well, the nucleobases that form the links in DNA and in RNA, they can only be joined together if there's a ribose sugar between each of the nucleobases. And the only place we see ribose is outside, is in living systems and the decay products of living systems. We've yet to find a natural source of these ribose sugars. And for that matter, we've yet to detect any of the 20 amino acids that form the building blocks of the proteins in these interstellar molecular clouds, which is the richest source we see of carbonaceous molecules in the universe. So it reduces the fine-tuning argument, but it doesn't eliminate the fine-tuning argument. Even with the prebiotic principle, we see the need for a supernatural entity. If you want to read about this in more detail, we've got a book called Origins of Life. And the interesting thing about the book that our biochemist, Fazl Rana, he's spoken here in this church as well. And Fuzz and I wrote a book, Origins of Life. And what's interesting is it got critiqued by one of the world's leading atheist origin of life researchers. And he published his critique in the journal, Origins of Life and Evolution of the Biosphere. And I'll tell you the bottom line. He says, I like everything about the book except the Jesus Christ part. He also wrote in the review that he thought it was the most extensive and best scientific summary of the status of origin of life research. Well, that's the prebiotic principle, often misnamed the anthropic principle. But what's also happened within my peer group is they've attempted to water down this argument for God by developing other principles, one called the Copernican principle. And the Copernican principle, it was Copernicus, for example, who discovered the Earth is not the center of the solar system. The sun is the center of the solar system. Well, they've taken it one step farther and say, we're in no special position whatsoever. And you're going to see that's really not true. But it is true, we're not at the center of the galaxy, we're not at the center of the universe. Then there's the relativistic principle, which says that humans are not privileged observers of the universe. We're not able to see anything that other positions within the universe could not also equally see. And probably what's happened most within the past few years is something called the mediocrity principle, which basically is saying you're not special at all. You're just simply mediocre. Earth and humanity's origin and history is not at all unusual. And this explains why you see amongst my peer group this idea that life is everywhere in the universe and we're just ordinary. Okay, I'm going to spend the next few minutes showing you why you're not mediocre, and the earth is not mediocre. We really are special. And what's driving this mediocrity principle is a so-called proof. And here's the proof. This was first worded by Stephen Hawking in his best-selling book, A Brief History of Time, where he said, our solar system certainly is a prerequisite for humanity's existence, but there does not seem to be any need for all these other galaxies. In other words, what Hawking is saying, if there is a God that created a special place for us so we humans can exist, why do you need 200 billion other galaxies? And if this is God, it just seems a gratuitous waste. And he says, this is not the God of the Bible, therefore the God of the Bible does not exist. And a few years ago, I debated Victor Stenger at the International Skeptic Society conference, and this is what he claims. He says, if God, referring to the God of the Bible, created the universe for humanity, he wasted huge amounts of space, time, matter, and energy. Basically making the point, if it's God, why is there all this waste? Well, what both Stephen Hawking and Victor Stenger are overlooking, you need the universe to be exactly the size that it is and exactly the mass that it is to get one planet on which advanced life can exist. You need those 200 billion galaxies. Yes, there's 50 billion trillion stars in the universe, but we need every single one of them. In fact, what we discovered is, if you have slightly more or slightly less, we couldn't possibly exist. In fact, as I wrote in Why the Universe is the Way It Is, if you go back to the beginning of the universe and change its mass by as little as the weight of one dime, add a dime or subtract a dime, that's enough to put it out of balance. I'll give you a couple of reasons why. The universe's mass determines the makeup of elements within the universe. We had a young man this morning asking a question about, there are 94 naturally existing elements. We've been able to make extra elements in laboratories. What we now know is that takes extraordinary fine-tuning to get those 94 naturally existing elements. And so, for example, the universe begins with nothing but hydrogen. There's only one element at the cosmic creation event, the element hydrogen. But we live in an expanding universe. And as the universe expands, it gets colder and colder. Now, if you go back in time, the universe is smaller and smaller and hotter. The universe begins infinitely hot, but as it expands, it cools. And there's a brief moment of time, only 20 seconds long, where the universe cools through that temperature zone where hydrogen can be fused into helium. The same reaction is going on inside the sun today. Now, if the universe is more massive than what we see, it spends longer going through that temperature phase, which means it converts a lot more of the primordial hydrogen into helium. But if it's a little bit less massive, it goes through it too quickly, and not enough hydrogen gets converted into helium. You say, what's the problem with that? Well, when the universe is created, you get that hydrogen being converted into helium, but all the other elements are made inside stars. The universe makes hydrogen and helium, stars make all the rest. However, the ratio of hydrogen to helium in the primordial universe determines what elements the stars will fuse. So, for example, if you get a little bit less than the 24% helium that came out of our universe, then the only elements you get being produced in stars is hydrogen and helium. Yes, it'll make a little more helium, but it'll make nothing heavier than helium. And in such a universe, you have no carbon, no oxygen, no nitrogen, and no possibility for life. Okay, make the universe slightly more massive, and instead of 24% helium, you get 24.5% helium, or 25% helium. That's enough that when stars form, they will convert all the hydrogen and helium in the universe into elements heavier than iron. There'll be nothing lighter than iron. And with nothing lighter than iron, there's no carbon, there's no oxygen, there's no nitrogen, there's no phosphorus, and no possibility for life. It must be exactly the mass that it is in order to get the correct ratio of hydrogen to helium, so you get 94 elements instead of just 2 or only elements heavier than iron. Okay, that's reason number 1. Reason number 2 is that the mass of the universe determines how rapidly it expands from the cosmic creation event. And I think that's easy to understand in the sense that think back to your junior high physics class, okay, when the teacher talked about gravity and how 2 massive bodies tend to attract one another, and the closer they are together, the more they attract, and the more massive the body, the more powerfully gravity operates. Well, if you make the universe more massive, that's going to cause gravity to pull together more powerfully and slow down the expansion of the universe. But if you make it less massive, the universe expands more rapidly. Now, here's the problem. If you make the universe very slightly less massive than what it is, the universe will expand so rapidly that gravity will not be able to collect any of the gas of the universe to make galaxies, stars, and planets. The universe would be forever nothing but dispersed gas, and life would be impossible. On the other hand, make it slightly more massive, gravity will so powerfully attract that gas, it'll convert 100% of it into black holes and neutron stars. Now, the density of matter in a neutron star or a black hole exceeds 2 billion tons per teaspoonful. A density that high is so extreme that molecules are impossible, atoms are impossible, even protons and electrons are impossible, and of course, life is impossible. Now, what I explain and why the universe is the way it is the degree you have to fine-tune the mass of the universe in order to get life existing later in the history of the universe. It must be fine-tuned to better than 1 part in a quadrillion, 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 quadrillion. Unless you have dark energy. How many of you have heard of dark energy? Okay, good. It's the dominant component of the universe. It wasn't discovered until 1999. We now know we can reduce that fine-tuning slightly for the mass of the universe, only slightly, but as a result we have to increase the fine-tuning of dark energy, not just to 1 part in a quadrillion, 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 but to 1 part in a quadrillion, 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 quadrillion. Did I come up with 8? That's how many you need to get everything fine-tuned. If you were to ask me as a scientist, where in all of science do we see the most extreme evidence for fine-tuning design by the supernatural handiwork of God? It's in dark energy, and it's in the total mass of the universe that's necessary to make possible the existence of life. So there's a really good reason why we live in a universe with 200 billion galaxies. The universe must be exactly that mass in order to make our existence possible. And the universe must expand at exactly the right rate. And it must be at exactly the right age so that the stars and galaxies are the right distance apart from one another that advanced life is possible. You don't want the stars too close together or the galaxies too close together. So the universe is not only precisely the right mass, it's also precisely the right size, which means we're not mediocre. The whole universe exists to make possible your existence. Does that give you some idea how valuable you are in the sight of God, that He did not consider it too expensive to make 50 billion trillion stars so that you can exist? You know, in Psalm 148, it tells us that God knows the name of every star. Now, there's this star registry where you can have a star named after you. Okay, you pay $54 and they'll name a star after you and show you where it is. But here's a quiz question. How many of those star registry star names are recognized by the International Astronomical Union? How many do you think? Yeah, if you guess 0, you're right. So you might want to save your $54. Moreover, there are so many stars in the universe, you could name 7 trillion stars after every human being that exists on the planet today, and you would not run out. Now, if God knows the name of every star, given that there's 7 trillion for every human being, do you think he knows your name? Keep in mind, you're a lot more complex than a star. And God literally created the whole universe so that you could exist. If the cosmic mass density were the tiniest fraction greater or smaller, no life would be possible anytime, anywhere in the universe. I don't think we're mediocre. What about the relativity principle? Are we just in any ordinary place in the universe, or are we really privileged observers? We are privileged both in time and space. Now, the universe is 13.79 billion years old, give or take 0.04 billion. We're still trying to measure with greater accuracy. But one thing we know, if the universe were slightly younger, there wouldn't be time for light from the cosmic creation event to travel on the space surface of the universe and reach our telescope. Which means we'd be ignorant. We astronomers would not be able to see the light from the cosmic creation event. And it's our ability to see that light from the cosmic creation event that gives us the most rigorous, compelling scientific proof that there must be a God beyond space and time that created us. I think God wanted us to be able to see that light. Now it's like this, if God put us here, say, 4 or 5 billion years earlier in cosmic history, we'd only be able to see 2/3 of the history of the universe. We wouldn't be able to see the first third, and we would be ignorant of all that evidence that testifies of God. On the other hand, if he puts us here even slightly later in cosmic history, dark energy right now is expanding the farthest reaches of the universe at about the velocity of light. In the future, the universe will expand more rapidly. That's the physics of the universe that we measure. It expands more and more rapidly as time goes by. In the very near future, those most distant regions will be moving away from us at greater than the velocity of light, which means you're not going to be able to see the light of the cosmic creation event. Bottom line, we are living at the only time in the history of the universe where we can read the whole book of nature from the very beginning of creation up to the present moment. I think God wanted us to read 100% of the history of the universe as is recorded upon the heavens, just like he wanted you to be able to have the capacity to read 100% of the 66 books that make up the Bible. But it only happens, it's only possible if we're existing at a particular moment in the history of the universe. Now, when I've shared this with my colleagues who are not Christians, they say, well, we just think this is a sheer coincidence that we happen to be here at the one time where we can see everything. I said, well, it's not just that we're at the only time, we're also living at the only place. And this is a little more impressive. I mean, you've got 50 billion trillion stars in the universe. What I'm going to show you is we happen to be orbiting the one star where it's possible for us to see the full extent of the observable universe and actually witness the cosmic creation event. If we were at any other location in the universe, we would not be able to see all the way back to the cosmic creation event. Here's some reasons why. We're at this unique time. We're also at this unique location. Now, 50% of the stars in our galaxy are in the central bulge. If we were near that central bulge, number one, we'd be killed by the deadly radiation from the supergiant black hole that exists there. Number two, the night sky would be so bright we wouldn't be able to see the radiation from the cosmic creation event, and we wouldn't be able to see galaxies outside of our own galaxy. But because we're far away from that central bulge, our night sky is dark enough. The other thing we note is that right now, we are in between two spiral arms. I mean, you can go outside and you'll be able to see the Perseus spiral arm and the Sagittarius spiral arm. We're in between those two spiral arms. Now, we cross the spiral arm about once every billion years, but right now we're halfway between. But if we were close to one of those spiral arms, the bright stars in those spiral arms would illuminate the night sky to such a degree you would not be able to see the light from the cosmic creation event or distant galaxies. But we're at the just right place relative to those spiral arms, and we're far away from gaseous nebulae. Now, one of the unique features of our Milky Way galaxy is that it has hundreds of these gaseous nebulae, but none of them are big. You say, well, what is a gaseous nebulae? These are basically gas clouds where new stars are forming. They're the maternity wards of our galaxy, where new stars are being born. The most famous of these is the Orion Nebula, and you can actually see this very late tonight, barely with the naked eye. But if we were any other kind of spiral galaxy, and life is only possible in a spiral galaxy, the nebulae, there'd be big nebulae so bright that it would illuminate the nighttime sky. But we happen to live in a galaxy where none of the gaseous nebulae are big enough to do that. Moreover, we're far away from even the nearest of those gaseous nebulae. The nearest is 1,450 light years away. Now, life is only possible in a cluster of galaxies. Now, most galaxies in our universe reside inside clusters. Only a few are outside clusters. But the typical cluster of galaxies has 3,000 to 10,000 member galaxies. Our cluster of galaxies has only 100. A typical cluster of galaxies, you have supergiant galaxies residing in them. Our cluster of galaxies, there are no supergiant galaxies. We have 2 large galaxies, and the other 98 are dwarf galaxies. And the galaxies are far apart in our cluster. They're close together in other clusters. So, for example, this is a typical cluster of galaxies where you see very big galaxies, and you see the galaxies are jammed rather tightly together. Now, if you were an astronomer in this particular cluster, there'd be places where you look up in the night sky and it'd be completely obliterated by the bright light of a supergiant galaxy in your vicinity. But this is our cluster of galaxies. Notice you only have 2 galaxies, our galaxy at the lower right, the Andromeda galaxy at the upper left. Everything else is a dwarf galaxy. And notice that Andromeda and our Milky Way galaxy are far apart, far enough apart where we get to see all the galaxies in the universe, and we get to see the light of the cosmic creation event. So we are in a privileged place. God put us in the one location of the universe where we can actually see 100% of the history of the universe. And we're at the one time where we can see 100%. Maybe our timing is a coincidence, but how can it possibly be a coincidence that we're also at the one location, especially given the enormous size of the universe? God placed us here at the one time in the one place where we could read the book of nature in its entirety and see that it testifies of His glory and His love for us human beings. So I don't think we're mediocre. What I've shared with you so far testifies that we are special. We are at a unique time and a unique place to be able to observe 100% of the history of the universe. And the Anthropic Principle holds, namely that there are over 1,000 different features of our universe, Milky Way galaxy, and planetary system that must be exquisitely fine-tuned to make possible our existence. But there's a new Anthropic Principle that's been discovered by physicists, and it's called the Anthropic Principle inequality. So here's the Anthropic Principle. Our existence depends on numerous cosmological and physical parameters whose numerical values must fall within very narrow ranges. But this is the Anthropic Principle inequality. That as we look at these 1,000+ features, we recognize that not only does it take 13.79 billion years for us to be able to see the entire history of the universe, it takes that time, minimum, in order to prepare a place for us. Several papers have been published in the last 18 months making the point that if intelligent life exists in the universe, we have to be the first. You might have an intelligent civilization after us, but you can't have one before. Why? Because it takes a minimum of 13.8 billion years for advanced life to even be possible. So if God wanted to make two different species of physical intelligent beings, we have to be the first of those species. It takes a minimum of 13.8 billion years to make a home for humanity. But those same features that tells us it takes a minimum of 13.8 billion years means that the maximum time we humans can exist in a civilized state is less than 41,000 years. So there's the inequality. It takes 13.8 billion years minimum to make a home for humanity, yet the maximum time we can exist in a civilized state is only 41,000 years wide. Now, all this assumes that the Creator is working with the laws of physics. I mean, if you've got different laws of physics, you can escape this inequality. But in a universe that's governed by gravity, thermodynamics, and electromagnetism, this is the way it must be. And when I wrote in Why the Universe is the Way It Is, God specially designed the laws of physics to be tools in His hand to quickly and efficiently eliminate evil and suffering once and for all, while at the same time enhancing the capacity of human beings to express free will and to receive and express love. Because that's God's goal. His goal is to reveal His glory in creation, but also to magnify His love. That's why He chose gravity, thermodynamics, electromagnetism, and the strong and weak nuclear force. So I recognize right away, with different laws of physics, you get different situation. But God's primary goal in creating the universe was it would be a tool to eliminate evil and suffering once and for all, while at the same time magnifying the capacity of us human beings to receive and express love. You know, what's unique about Christianity, it's something I discovered when I was studying the holy books of the religions of the world. The other religions give you a one creation model. The Bible teaches a two creation model. He creates the universe to be a tool to eliminate evil and suffering, and once that happens, the universe will have fulfilled its purpose. God will remove it from existence and replace it with a brand new creation. And you can read Revelation 21 and 22. In the new creation, there will be no gravity, no thermodynamics, no electromagnetism. It will no longer be necessary because evil is no longer a possibility. He'll replace that with brand new laws of physics. But for now, it needs to be those laws of physics, which is why it tells us in the Bible, the laws that govern the heavens and the earth are immutable. As God doesn't change, the laws of physics don't change until the full number of human beings that God intends to redeem have been redeemed. A day will come when He will change the laws of physics, but not until evil is permanently conquered and removed. Now, I'm going to close my message here by sharing with you why, in the context of these laws of physics, you have this inequality, why it takes a minimum of 14 billion years to make a home for us, and why the window of time in which we could live in a civilized state is very brief. In fact, if you're with me this morning, it's not as wide as 41,000 years. The width is only 10,000 years. All right, then we'll talk about the philosophical significance of it. But one reason why you need a minimum of 14 billion years, this morning in the Q&A time, I explained how our planet Earth is uranium thorium champion of the universe by a wide, wide margin. And it's because of that our planet has the possibility of having oceans and continents coexisting on its surface. The creation of the continents was through the superabundance of uranium and thorium. And you need a planet with surface continents and oceans to recycle the nutrients so that you can have advanced life. But uranium and thorium come only from one source, the nuclear furnaces of supergiant stars. Supernova, when they erupt, they make uranium and thorium. And when the universe is young, there are lots of supernova eruptions. As the universe expands, there are fewer and fewer of these eruptions. And uranium and thorium are radiometric, which means they decay after they're being produced. Which is why you get a curve like this for the history of the uranium and thorium abundance of the universe. When the supernova are exploding at a high rate, the abundance of uranium and thorium goes up, and then when the supernova begin to decline and you get the decay of uranium and thorium, the abundance drops. But it's such that you get a maximum abundance of uranium and thorium when the universe is about 9.2 billion years old. Okay, the Earth is 4.57 billion years old. I told you earlier that the universe is 13.8 billion years old. Well, guess what? 9.2 plus 4.57 adds up to the age of the universe. What does that mean? God created the Earth at the moment in the history of the universe when uranium and thorium were at maximum abundance. That's one of many reasons why we have this superabundance of uranium and thorium. That explains why you need at least 9.2 billion years. Now, this morning I also showed you why God simply can't create human beings at the moment He forms the Earth. It's because stars take time to reach maximum stability. And so I showed you this graph this morning where if we look at the flaring activity of our star, the Sun, it takes 4.57 billion years to reach the minimum amount, the level that's necessary to make possible the existence of us human beings. So 9.2 plus 4.57 billion. And also, we need those continents. If you read Genesis chapter 1, the world begins as a water world with no continents at all. And then you get tectonic activity, earthquake activity, that kicks in the production of continental land masses. But it's such that these continents grow with respect to time. And so what we now know about the building up of the continents is indeed Genesis got it right. The world starts off with no land masses at all. Then you get a few volcanic islands, and then the tectonics begins to build up these continents. And as time goes by, the continents could cover more and more of the surface of the Earth. But if you want human civilization, the continental coverage must be 29%. Not 28, not 30, but 29. Now, again, it explains why we're here at this time in the history of the Earth. If we were here later, it would be 30% coverage. If we were here a little bit earlier, it would be 28% coverage, and we wouldn't be able to sustain civilization. And then finally, God wanted us to be able to harvest fossil fuels. If we were not able to harvest coal, oil, and natural gas, we couldn't launch and sustain civilization. Now, I'm well aware that today we have the possibility of sustaining our civilization without fossil fuels. But it takes access to the fossil fuels to develop that technology. We would never get there if it wasn't for the fact that we had an abundant supply of coal, oil, and natural gas. And we now know is that that varies with respect to the history of the Earth, such that we human beings were actually placed here at the time when the resources of coal, oil, and natural gas were at a maximum amount. Now, there are many more reasons than the ones I've just presented to you why it takes 13.8 billion years. You'll see them in why the universe is the way it is, and also why we have to be in this narrow window of time. So you can check out the book to get those details. And then when I review in my latest book, Improbable Planet, why the window of time is not as wide as 41,000 years, but is only 10,000 years wide. Those of you that were here this morning would have seen this chart, which makes the point that we can't be here without an ice age cycle. But what happens during the ice age cycle is the global mean temperature jumps up and down by 24 degrees Fahrenheit over time scales of just 1 or 2 or 3 centuries, which would make impossible global civilization. But what has happened is that the cycles that drive this temperature instability all happen to come into sync simultaneously in such a way as for the last 9,000 years, we've had this period of extreme climate stability. So you look at the right-hand part of the chart, you'll see that the global mean temperature over the past 9,000 years has not changed by more than 2 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's what makes possible global civilization. There's a reason why human beings did not launch global civilization until 9,000 years ago. It required this extreme climate stability to make that possible. But we also know that these cycles that drive that extreme temperature instability that has existed throughout the entire ice age cycle, it's going to come back, and it's going to come back soon. And when I write about an improbable planet, we're going to enter that period of extreme climate instability within 1,400 years or less. Now, it could happen in as little as 100 years, but we may be able to put it off for as much as 1,400 years. And if you take a premillennial perspective on eschatology, end times prophecy, take off 1,000 years. That means we got less than 400 years in order to bring about the fulfillment of the Great Commission, because there'll be 1,000 years where Jesus reigns on earth, and from what I read, that's going to be a time of a climate stability and global human civilization. And my point here, I was asked to comment this morning, if I could this evening, comment on global warming. My message is this: climate instability is the norm. What's the extreme exception is the climate stability we've had of the past 9,000 years. We need to see this period of extreme climate stability as God's gift to humanity. He set everything up just right so we can have this brief window of time in which we could have the climate stability that's necessary to take the good news of salvation to all the people groups of the world. As it tells us in Romans 8, once that full number of human beings that God intends to redeem have been redeemed, He's going to take us from this creation into a new creation. He's given us this window to make it happen. Now, I say this because a few years ago I spoke at a large seminary where the theology professors were trying to persuade me that Jesus will return about 3 million years from now. And it's going to happen after we bring Christianity to all the peoples of the world, and we're going to take this long period of time to make it happen. And I said, well, I can see how you might think that from your interpretation of the Bible, but from my interpretation of the book of nature, we better make it happen a lot sooner than 3 million years. Matter of fact, because of the brightening of the sun I talked about this morning, the sun will eventually get too bright to make possible the existence of us human beings. And that's going to happen in a lot less than 3 million years. Now, I don't want you to panic, because the good news is this: if we fulfill the Great Commission quickly, we get to exit this creation and enter a brand new creation. And as I shared this morning, the new creation is a whole lot more beautiful and rewarding than anything that Adam and Eve experienced in the Garden of Eden. The Garden of Eden is something we can imagine. It was great, it was wonderful, better than what we experience now. But the promise that Paul explained in 1 Corinthians 2:9, God has prepared a place for us that no one can think or imagine or conceive how great and wonderful and rewarding and pleasurable and loving it will be. That's where God wants to take us, and He's given us this narrow window of time. But let me conclude with this. When this Anthropic Principle inequality was first discovered, the astronomers that discovered it said, the only possible explanation for this extreme inequality. It takes 1,000,000 times more time to prepare a place for us than the window of time in which we can exist. They said the only possible explanation, somebody beyond the universe must have a very high value of humanity and a very high purpose of humanity. And Brandon Carter, who brought that out, said, I don't know what that purpose or value is, but it's got to be very great. Well, the Bible tells us exactly what that purpose is and why it is so great. With that, I'll take questions on any topic you care to bring up, but thank you.
If you have a question, please come and line up here. Please tell us your name and then the question.
Hello, I'm Megan. The question I have is, like, when there's like some of the greatest geniuses in the world, like Stephen Hawking, like how can they look at evidence like that and still not see what's so obvious?
Okay, very good question. You know, Stephen Hawking is a brilliant physicist. He's aware of the same evidence. Why is he not looking at the evidence and drawing the same conclusions that I am drawing? And I've got to hear Stephen Hawking speak, a remarkable individual. And I remember when he was speaking at Caltech, he said, all of you think I'm much more brilliant than you are. He says, I'm not. There are many people here in the room that are more brilliant than I am. The difference is I can't play golf, I can't fish. The only thing I can do is theoretical physics. He says, all of you who are smarter than I am are distracted by all the good things of life. All I can do is theoretical physics. However, a friend of mine who was a Christian, Don Page, lived with Stephen and Jane Hawking in their home for the 4-year period that he was doing research at Cambridge University. And Don is the son of a missionary couple. And Don explained to Stephen and Jane when he moved into their home, he said, you know, I'm a Christian. It's my practice to begin the morning with prayer and Bible study. And they said, fine, but can we join you? So for a 4-year period, Stephen Hawking had daily Bible study and prayer with Don Page and his evangelical wife, Jane. But what Don told me, and what Jane put into print, is that Stephen was fine as long as they were talking about God. But when it got to a personal God, you got the famous Hawking smirk, which says, I'm not listening anymore. So he's okay with God, but not a personal God. And you actually see that in his books. He's okay with deism, but not theism, and especially not Christianity. And you ask me why. Well, one thing you'll see in his book, A Brief History of Time, he said, my goal in life is to discover the theory of everything. And he says, by the theory of everything, I don't just mean the unified field theory of theoretical physics. I mean a theory that literally explains everything, where I know as much as God knows. Now, if you read the Bible, there is another individual that sought to know as much as God knows. But that's the problem. Stephen Hawking, from what I can see in his writing, is not prepared to submit to the authority of God. He's really wanting to know as much as God knows. And so that can happen to even the most brilliant minds, where because of their personal autonomy, they blind themselves to the evidence that's out there. And Stephen recently wrote a book called The Grand Design. And in that book he said, the planets in our solar system are just ordinary planets. There's nothing special. And we've discovered thousands of planets outside of our solar system. They prove that there's nothing special about the Earth or any of the solar system planets. But hey, you can go to something, you can put this into a search engine, exoplanet or extrasolar planet catalog. It'll pop up for you a catalog which lists the characteristics of all 3,700 planets that have been discovered so far. None of them are like the Earth. In fact, none of them are like any of the planets in our solar system. And it was that recognition that led astronomers to appreciate that not only must the Earth be fine-tuned for our existence, but every planet in our solar system must be fine-tuned. One thing I can share with you, you'll see this in the book Improbable Planet. We wouldn't be here unless Mars was exactly the way it is, unless Venus was exactly the way it is, unless Jupiter was exactly the way it is. You know, Thanksgiving is coming up next month. When you're eating your Thanksgiving dinner, I encourage you to spend a moment to thank God for Saturn, for Jupiter, for Neptune, for Venus, for Mars, because every one of them must be exactly the way they are in order for you to be able to consume that turkey.
Your name.
My name's David Foxworth. I got a lot of things kind of jumbling together, so I'm particularly excited about what you said about the new creation that's coming. I'm interested in what eternity looks like. I mean, we're going to a place without time, I'm assuming, if that's correct. And does that mean the planets and the rotation and all of this, where we measure time, we will no longer, there won't be time anymore? That's part of it. I heard one young...
Hey, can you stop right there? Because it's easier for me if I can take them one at a time. Okay. So I'll let you ask another question. Let me answer that one first. Okay, you'll find that in chapter 13 of Why the Universe is the Way It Is. Basically, what you can expect the new creation to be like. And you're onto something. This universe is constrained by cosmic time. It's one time dimension that moves forward. You can't stop or reverse the arrow of time. That's necessary to restrain the expression of evil. In the new creation, where evil no longer exists, God's going to allow us to experience not just linear time, but geometric time. Now, I use the term geometric because it's generic. I don't know if God's going to have us live in 2 dimensions of time, 3 dimensions of time, or some other dimensionality that permits temporal experiences. But it's going to be such that it tells us in Revelation, we'll no longer be in families or marriages, because we'll all be one as the Father and Son are one. Now, the reason why God set up marriages and families, because that's the way you can experience the maximum intimacy, given that you're constrained in linear time. But if you're not constrained in linear time, you don't need to have that. Now, it doesn't mean you're not going to be in contact with your wife. I'm just assuming you're married. Maybe you're not.
I am.
You're married, okay. Well, one thing I share with my wife is, you know, I get on an airplane, I'm probably 3,000 miles away from her, and I'm out of contact with her. In the new creation, we'll never be apart from one another. We'll be in continual contact for the rest of eternity. But that's not going to constrain us from having a similar relationship with as many other people as we want. I'll tell you one thing that depressed me when I first gave my life to Jesus Christ, was thinking, you know, when I get to the new creation, I really want a private office appointment with the Apostle Paul. And it'd be nice to have one with King David and Moses and all the rest of the heroes we see described in the Bible. Then I realized my last name is Ross. Okay, there's going to be a long line of people ahead of me. And I calculated that it could be millions of years before a 2-hour window would open up on the Apostle Paul's appointment calendar. And that was depressing to think about. But what I realized is, in geometric time, the Apostle Paul will be able to take 1 billion plus simultaneous private one-on-one appointments. And the rest of us can have that too.
Man.
But I think you can see why God doesn't give us that now. If he gave us that now, evil people would use it to wreak unrepairable harm. So he constrains us in linear time. But in the new creation, we'll be in constant fellowship with all the other people that exist there in the new creation, with all the angels and with God himself. And because there's no sin or evil, it's going to be an amazing experience of receiving overwhelming love. That's just part of the reward of the new creation. But I also described for you in Why the Universe is the Way It Is, the different physics that's going to enable us to experience unimaginable joy and rewards for the rest of eternity. But you're also going to be involved in a career. Recognize this. Part of our role here on planet Earth is, yes, to bring a host of people to salvation in Jesus Christ from every people group, but it's also to get prepared for your future career. So think of your life here on planet Earth as like going through graduate school, and you're going for a PhD, and the PhD is going to enable you to have an amazing career. That's what's happening right now for every human being. God is preparing you and every other follower of Jesus Christ for an amazing career in the new creation. You know, Paul gave us a hint of that. We're going to be teaching the angels. We're going to be instructing them. Why? Because we get to experience the grace of God. They simply watch the grace of God. The angels are watching us, intently trying to learn about the great mystery of the grace of God, but they only get to observe. We get to experience. And because of that experience, we will be elevated into a position where we will be judges and rulers and teachers over the angels. But I believe God's going to do a lot of creating in the new creation, and he's going to need magistrates to govern what he creates in the new creation. You're going to have an amazing career. You're not just going to be sitting on a harp and playing music on a cloud for the rest of eternity. I mean, you'll be able to do that too, but it's not just going to be that.
Thank God.
Oh, your other point?
You've persuaded me to the old creation model, so I'm with you on that. But I heard a creation scientist once who said that God stretched out the heavens, and when he did that, that kind of skewed the numbers and makes it look like it's older when actually it's younger. So I wish you could speak to that. And also, where does 1,000 years is a day and a day is 1,000 years? How does that fit into it?
Okay, good point. And this is where I think young earth and old earth creationists agree. There are 11 passages in the Bible where it says God stretches out the heavens. And the verb there is natah, which means that God is expanding the universe. And Job 9, verse 8 says God alone expands the universe. So it's making the point that God is the one that's expanding at exactly the right rate, something I described in my talk tonight. And I don't know of young earth creationists who claim that God expanded the universe in such a way that even though it looks billions of years old, it's only thousands of years old. Now, what they're overlooking is they're presuming there are no clocks to check their speculation, that we only have clocks here on Earth. Not true. We've got clocks all over the universe. So, for example, I mentioned supernova tonight. When a supernova explodes, it gets very bright and then it dims down. And it takes about 7 months to go through that cycle of getting very bright and dimming. That's a clock. And we can see supernova all over the universe. Now, in a universe that expands under the theory of special relativity, the more distant the clock, the slower it runs. But in the young Earth model, they need those distant supernova to go through their light cycle in 17 to 18 seconds. Not 7 months, but 17 to 18 seconds. In the old Earth model, where the universe is expanding over billions of years, those distant supernova wouldn't take 7 months, but would take 9 or 10 months because of the special relativity effect of the expansion of the universe. What do our measurements tell us? They're 9 to 10 months. It's not 17 to 18 seconds. So the clocks that we see in the universe tell us that the universe indeed is expanding at a rate that's very nearly constant.
1,000 years is a day, a day is 1,000.
Yeah. Okay, Psalm 90. A day of the Lord is like 1,000 years. 1,000 years is like a day. Read the next verse. It says 1,000 years is like a watch in the night. A watch in the night is 3 or 4 hours, depending what period of Jewish history you're looking at. So it's basically making the point that from God's perspective, he can arbitrarily expand time in our context or arbitrarily compress it in our context. And what I demonstrate in my book, Beyond the Cosmos, mathematically, that's only possible for a being that is able to operate in the equivalent of 2 independent dimensions of time. So we're constrained to 1 dimension at time. God is not constrained to 1 dimension at time. So for what for us can seem like 1,000 years, for him can be just an instant. And likewise, it could be a much longer period of time than what we experience. And if he's in control of time to that degree, we can trust that He's given us the free will and holds us responsible, but at the same time, He predetermined every thought we think, every word we speak, every action we perform. And beyond the cosmos, I show you how you can have both human free will and divine predestination simultaneously operating if you allow God to be as big as what physics now proves Him to be.
Thank you.
I'm Tina, and I would love to find out from a scientific point what happens in Revelation. We just studied Revelation. Pastor Peter did such a good job, and if you could just expand a little bit. You talked a little bit about the sun getting warmer. Would you tell us more?
Well, yes. I mean, you see in Revelation 8, a time will come when the sun will get bright enough that it's going to be very uncomfortable for us human beings in the face of the earth. Notice that what you see in the catastrophes that Revelation speaks about, it's not talking about the extinction of humanity, but is talking about things becoming much more uncomfortable than we are right now. And, global warming really is happening. It's not severe, but keep in mind our planet is so delicately balanced that even a little bit of extra global warming is such as to make some parts of the planet warm enough to bring about significant human deaths. I mean, for example, last year in Iran, the effective temperature in one city of Iran was 156 degrees. Now, if you don't have air conditioning, that's going to kill you, literally, within hours. So that could be what's going on there in that particular chapter. Talks about forest and grass fires and how the sun, moon, and stars will turn red like the blood of a corpse. I live in California. We have forest fires all the time. When you get a forest fire, you get a lot of ash and dust in the atmosphere. And what that does is it turns the color of the sun, moon, and stars red, like the blood of a corpse. Joel chapter 2 speaks about that as well. My personal take on the book of Revelation is that the book of Revelation is a capstone of the Old Testament prophetic books. I mean, like your pastor, my church also asked me to teach on the book of Revelation. And I told them, look, to do it justice, we're going to have to also study all of Ezekiel. We're going to have to study Daniel. We're going to have to study Zechariah, big chunks of Isaiah and Jeremiah, and all the way back to Deuteronomy. And I named several, the minor prophets. It took us 7 years, 9 months to get through the book of Revelation because we were studying over 1/3 of the entire Bible. And so after we recorded that whole course, they called it the Great Tribulation because it took over 7 years to go through it. So, but I think that's where your pastor would agree with me. Revelation is not just a message from a single book. It really ties together all of Old Testament prophecy. And so I appreciate the fact that this is a church that understands that this is a lot of people say there's no way I can understand Revelation. You won't if you don't put it in the context of the Old Testament prophetic books.
My name is Diane Miller. First, I'd like to thank you for coming back. And my question is this: based on the assumption that the fossil fuels are the cushion between the Earth's core and its surface, and the consumption of fossil fuels at this time, and it seems to increase daily, would that not become more accelerating to the tectonic plates, causing more shifts? And would that be part of the atmospheric changes that are causing those slight shifts that you mentioned in the warming?
Well, there is some concern that the harvesting of fossil fuels through fracking could cause minor tectonic events. There's a debate over that. What I can assure you is that there is a consensus that if they do happen, they're minor. It's not going to cause magnitude 9 earthquakes all over the earth, but you could get magnitude 5s and 6s. That's a possibility. That's something that's being researched right now. There's a lot of fossil fuels in the crust of the earth, but it's only a very, very tiny fraction of all the biodeposits in the crust of the earth. I mean, that gets all the attention. But I think as I shared this morning, if you look at the limestone, that's 75 quadrillion tons. All the fossil fuels combined are less than 1 quadrillion tons. So it's just a tiny fraction of the biodeposits that are there. But because of those biodeposits, humans were able to use the coal, the oil, and the natural gas to get civilization up and running and get it to a point right now where we could actually sustain our civilization without accessing that coal, oil, and natural gas. In fact, I've got friends who are working on coming up with reactors that do the same thing as the interior of the sun. We're not talking a fission reactor, we're talking a fusion reactor. If we're able to develop fusion reactors, we can produce a near limitless supply of energy by copying what goes on in the interior of the sun. And my colleagues have been working on this literally for 70 years, but they're at the point of a major breakthrough. We'll see what happens in the next few years.
Hi, my name is Ryan Aiello, and I wanted to talk to you. So you were talking about the new creation and how time would go both forward and back. And I was thinking about the Lorentz transformation in black holes, where space points one way, which is inward, and time goes every way.
Yeah, well, what we know in physics is, in fact, there are 8 separate experiments that tell us that you can slow down time, but you can't stop it or reverse it. It's one dimension that can't be stopped or reversed. And the new creation, I believe time will continue to go forward, but it won't be limited to a single dimension of time. So I don't think it's a place where you're going to be able to go back in time. You know, it will be temporal in the sense that we'll be moving forward in time, but being able to experience time geometrically, not just linearly. Did you have a follow-up? Or are you okay with that?
I was wondering if that was going to be the beginning of God's new creation.
Yeah, that's the beginning of God's new creation. I mean, this universe has 1 dimension of time, 3 big dimensions of space, and 6 very tiny dimensions of space. When God created the universe, He created those space-time dimensions. When He removes the universe from existence, He's going to remove those space-time dimensions, and the new creation is going to be radically different laws of physics, but also radically different dimensions. Now, I do think it's going to have dimensions, because if you read Revelation 21 and 22, it talks about an angel with a measuring rod, but I don't think it's going to be length, width, and height. It's going to be different spatial dimensions and different time dimensions, or it might even be dimensions that are way beyond anything that's conceivable in space and time. And I think we're going to have to wait to find out.
Thank you.
Sure.
I'm Randy Peters. I appreciate the discussion on global warming. So the question that comes down to is there's all the discussion about how much of this is man-made, according to like chemicals, or what the grass is being taken away from the desert.
Well, there's a reason why there's a debate on whether or not the global warming we're experiencing is man-induced or naturally induced. The data we have tells us that the human contribution is at least 20%. It might be as big as 80%. So when you've got numbers that allow you to go from 20% to 80%, you're going to get a debate. And in fact, yesterday I was having dinner with one of our scientists in our Knoxville, Tennessee chapter, basically asking about the latest attempts to try to get those errors down a little bit. And he says, well, there's 2 satellites we're going to be able to send up. They're not funded yet, but if they're funded, we might be able to get the range from 40% to, say, 70%, or, say, 60% to 80%. And he says, we may have that kind of data in as little as 10 years. But he says, if you really want an answer that's good to 1%, we're going to need another 150 years of data. The problem is, if the global warming trends continue, we're going to need to do something about it in less than 150 years. And that's another part of the debate. Assuming that we humans are responsible for a large measure of it, which is certainly a possibility, maybe even a probability, what should we do about it? And recently, I critiqued the book that just came out by Al Gore and the movie that came out on Al Gore on this. And what I notice is Al Gore is still making the same proposition. We need to politically organize and get the peoples of the world to make the necessary economic sacrifices to stabilize the climate for as long as possible. What he's not taking into account, we human beings are sinners. We tend to do things in our own selfish best interests, and sacrificing our economic well-being doesn't fit that biblical description of humanity very well. And then you've got the problem that maybe we here in the United States would make a big economic sacrifice, but does that mean every other nation of the world would follow suit? Probably not. In fact, I would bet there'd be Americans that would try to cheat. Far better strategy. Let's pursue those things that would cool the planet and stabilize the climate, that would actually put more money in people's pockets. Now, people like Al Gore don't think there are such solutions. There really are. And the ones I described in my book, Hidden Treasures in the Book of Job. One that I talked about this morning. If we could shrink the Sahara Desert and bring it back to the size that it had 2,000 years ago, the plants on that restored part of North Africa would soak up huge quantities of greenhouse gases. Moreover, you could be planting wheat there, and that would provide a cash crop for all the people living in North Africa. So you got more food, you got more money, and you're doing the best thing to stabilize the climate. And there's actually multiple solutions that are like that. And people will buy it. The Republicans will vote for it, the Democrats will vote for it, because everybody wins. So that's my recommendation. We need to pursue win-win solutions, not ones where one group of people sacrifices, another group doesn't sacrifice. That will never work.
Man. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Ross.
Welcome.
So let's pray, please. Heavenly Father, we do thank you for this night and for this whole day and for the special opportunity to hear from your servant. We thank you for Dr. Hugh Ross and Kathy. We speak your blessing, your goodness, your power. We ask, Lord, that all of your design for their lives would be fully completed, that the destiny and the calling that you have assigned to them, none of it would fall to the ground. Like you said of your prophet Samuel, that none of his words ever fell to the ground. Lord, I ask that this man and what you have invested in him and given him would go to the furthest corners of the world, not just in the proclamation or through high technology, but it would be received and would be part of the reformation of the understanding and coming into connection with you for your purpose in this hour. We speak your blessing and your anointing over this amazing couple. Lord, now we commend ourselves and commit ourselves unto you. I ask that you give your people a good night's sleep and rejoicing in their homes, the blessings of God throughout this week and into the purposes that you have for them to see others come to Christ, and the maturity of your people to lead this nation in righteousness. We speak blessings now over each of you in Jesus' name. Amen. And good night, and God bless you.